Welcome to another edition of Time Suck Short Sucks. I'm Dan Cummins, and today I will be sharing the story of Magdalena Solís. Magdalena was a Mexican cult leader and the extremely abnormal sexually motivated female serial killer. Almost everything about Magdalena's life was abnormal. As a teenager, she was doing sex work on the streets of the city of Monterrey when she was approached by the Hernandez brothers in early 1963. The two men were leading a strange and new little cult they'd quickly formed in late 1962 in the small mountain village of La Yerba Buena, and they made Magdalena an offer she would accept enthusiastically. They wanted her to play a prominent role in their cult, to appear as an Aztec goddess, reincarnated to the villagers so they could continue their little cult game and continue scamming them for sex and money. Magdalena would do more than just take on this role. In her mind, she would truly become an Aztec goddess, and she would become even more bloodthirsty than the Aztec priests of old who once worshipped this goddess. She quickly became addicted to the newfound power this role gave her, and soon she would be leading the cult she had been recruited to join. She would be the village's new master, a brutal and terrible master. She would abuse, terrify, and sacrifice some of the villagers to maintain control over those who remained. She devised a blood sacrifice ritual where villagers would die by having their hearts literally cut out of their bodies, and then she would drink their blood. This story is perfect for the month of Halloween. A spooky story that a horror movie could easily be based on. The terrible but true story of Magdalena Solís, the high priestess of blood.
Words and ideas can change the world.
I hated her, but I wanted to love my mother.
I have a dream.
I'll plead not guilty right now.
Your only chance is to leave with us.
Magdalena Solís was most likely born between 1944 and 1946. A variety of newspaper articles published in 1963, the year of her murders, arrest, and imprisonment, list her age as either 17, 18, or 19 years old. And a few sources report that she was born in 1947, which would put her at either 15 or 16 years old when she was arrested. So she was a teenager. Sources for this case are inconsistent with some biographical details, but they all seem to agree on the core and very grisly details of this story. Magdalena was born in the Mexican state of Tamaulipas, located in the northeast and bordered by Nuevo León, San Luis Potosi, and the U.S. state of Texas. She very, very likely grew up in an extremely poor and dysfunctional family. Her parents' names aren't listed in any of the sources used for this research, but we do know that she had a brother named Eleazar, who was a few years older than her. Most sources list him as either 18 or 19 at the time of his arrest. Magdalena started doing sex work when she was a young teen, around the age of 12, which is, of course, so fucking disturbing, and was actually sadly common in this area at this time. Her brother, Eleazar, acted as her pimp, which tells you a lot about her family. If you're 12 and your brother, who is probably only 14 or 15 himself, is helping you to sell your body to men 2 or 3 or even 4, 5, and 6 times your age, and you know old men, old rock spida pedos, were going to be a lot of her customers, well, your family life has been fucked. Very likely that mom and dad are either both dead, both gone in the wind, having totally abandoned their kids, or one or both of them are super fucked up and abusive, likely very sexually abusive, so much so that living on the street as a sibling pimp and prostitute duo is a better alternative than living at home. We don't know the name of the little village these two grew up in, but eventually they would move to the city of Monterrey in the neighboring state of Nuevo León, and according to the Mammoth Book of More Bizarre Crimes by Robin Odell and Paul Donnelly, Eleazar may have also been a sex worker, in addition to being a pimp. Magdalena would take on primarily female clients because she was attracted to women, and Eleazar was mostly interested in men. And they would their work on the streets, and they would work in back alleys of Monterrey for several years as teenage sex workers. And then a very unique opportunity would fall in Magdalena and Eleazar's laps. One night, they would meet the Hernandez brothers, who had come to Monterrey looking to recruit a young female sex worker to help them with a cult they had formed in a rural village some 110 miles southeast of the city up in the mountains. In December of 1962, Brothers Santos and Cayetano Hernandez, a pair of real rascals, some bandidos who roamed around rural Mexico stealing from and taking advantage of simple farmers, settled in La Yerba Buena, very small farming village of about 50 or 60 people in the state of San Luis Potosi, at the base of the Sierra Madre Oriental mountain range. The village was one of several in the area, and all of them were populated almost exclusively with uneducated and illiterate farmers. And above the villages, up in the mountains, were a series of large limestone caves that will feature prominently in this story. The Hernandez brothers were master scammers. We know almost nothing about their backstory, but based on how quickly they tricked the villagers into believing they were the prophets of a powerful and exiled Inca god, I'm guessing they had a lot of experience in trying to bullshit other villagers in the past. Instead of stealing from a few villagers, these two now wanted to take over an entire village, just straight up run a little town. And not just as the equivalent of a corrupt mayor or even a dictator, but as, emissaries of a god. They demanded to be worshipped, be given monetary and sexual tributes. And the villagers, for the most part, obeyed them. Why? Well, because they promised them something in return. A great and fabled fortune. In exchange for their worship and tributes, they promised the villagers that if the god they represented, if they proved themselves worthy of this god, if they did everything that was asked of them of this god, well, the god would soon reveal the location of a great deal of ancient treasure, which according to local legend was hidden somewhere inside one of the caves above the village. As I mentioned, the village residents weren't well educated, so they didn't even realize that the Inca were never in Mexico. Never came even close to Mexico. The Inca kingdom existed entirely in South America, in land that now belongs to the nations of Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, Argentina, and Chile. Most people think that the brothers were thinking of the ancient Aztecs, who did live in modern Mexico, when they talked about the Inca. And it is darkly funny to me that they were able to pull off scamming these people into thinking they were connected to a powerful and ancient god, even though they picked a god from an entirely different part of the world, about 3,000 miles away. And what Christian god do I represent? Well, why, Muhammad, of course, yes, and the great Christian god Buddha is as well. Don't fucking worry about the details, okay? Just keep worshiping me, just keep fucking me. You give me your money, and that's how you get the treasure. That's how you get the treasure. Despite this pretty big mistake, Cayetano and Santos Hernandez still managed to run their cult scheme for months, to get the villagers to clear out a large cave system in the mountainside, convert portions of it into some sort of cult compound / a cult temple, where the brothers were able to conduct their rituals. And inside their mountain cave compound, they would have, to please the gods, of course, or their god. It's unnamed again. Drug-fueled orgies with the villagers were had, some of whom would become their sexual slaves. and I gotta say, I'm pretty surprised they did this in a village of 50 or 60 people. I mean, not to be terribly shallow, but honestly, how many of those 50 or 60 villagers could possibly be sexy enough for an orgy? I can't be the only one wondering this. Kind of seems like these cult leaders must have not been real picky regarding who they slept with. I mean, let's say there's like 60 villagers. How many of them are going to be very old grandmas or grandpas? 10 or so? How many are very young children? At least another 10 or so? So maybe 40 tops are between the ages of, say, 16 and 50. Out of those, roughly 20, maybe, I don't know, or 20 are going to be female. And out of those 20, how many are women these guys are legitimately attracted to? 5? I don't know, 10 at most. I'm just thinking that maybe those orgies weren't the sexiest orgies. Unless not everyone was invited. Unless it was, a small handful of the villagers and then the brothers. Otherwise, it would just be like, okay, all right, who's sucking my dick? Shit, is Maria here? No? Isabella? Valentina? Damn it. All right, get over here, Pedro. Just don't say anything or touch me so I can pretend you're someone else. Anyway, the Hernandez brothers, they run their cult scam for a few months, but then around 3 months in, the villagers, well, they're getting pretty tired of paying tributes and literally getting fucked, but having nothing to show for it. Where is the promised treasure? Where are the signs from the gods that the brothers also promised? This cult is about to die in the vine as more and more villagers start to think these two are nothing but scammers. So the brothers start to brainstorm. They know they can't find any gold, but they can find a sign from the gods, so they recruit a teen girl from another nearby village named Selena Salvana to serve as their new priestess, a new hot priestess. And while Selena now spices up the orgies and is regularly purified by Santos Hernandez, i.e. he's fucking her all the time, this new distraction doesn't keep most of the villagers distracted for long. She was not the sign they hoped for, and after a few more weeks, looks like the cult is still going to rebel against the brothers. So now, feeling desperate, the Hernandez brothers decide to travel to Monterrey to recruit a female sex worker to participate in their scam. Someone they can introduce not just as a prophetess, a priestess, but as a goddess. And this is how they meet young Magdalena Solís and her brother Eleazar. The Hernandez brothers explained to Magdalena and Eleazar that everything was going smoothly for a few months until the first seeds of doubt were planted amongst the villagers. They told them they needed a new distraction to keep the faith and the financial and sexual contributions flowing in. Magdalena and Eleazar now return to La Yerba Buena with the Hernandez brothers, and all the villagers are gathered together inside their cave compound to meet them. And using a smoke screen for theatrical effect, the brothers present Magdalena and Eleazar in the midst of a big ceremony as the promised signs from the gods. Eleazar is presented as the reincarnation of St. Francis of Assisi, the patron saint of Italy, and so much more, the founder of the Franciscan religious order. And while some sources say that Magdalena was presented as the reincarnation of El Niño Fidencio, a faith healer and spiritualist who died 2 decades earlier and was revered as a goddess, most sources, and I think this is what happened, say that Magdalena was presented as a reincarnation of the Aztec goddess Coatlicue. And I love this left turn. I love that they are now blending 3 spiritual belief systems. The Hernandez brothers are connected to some Inca god never named in sources. I mean, for all I know, they just fucking made up a name. I doubt the illiterate villagers knew anything about Inca mythology, so they could have just said whatever they wanted. And now they're throwing a Catholic saint and an Aztec goddess into the mix. You know what? Why not? Just get creative. Coatlicue was an earth goddess. It served as a symbol of both the creator and destroyer of life and of the world in general. She was considered the mother of both gods and mortals to the Aztecs. So she's a big deal. Way, way bigger deal than St. Francis of Assisi, I might add. I mean, he's a very well-known saint, but he's no Jesus. Why this power discrepancy? I don't know. Maybe because Mexico is a very Catholic nation, was even more so in the 1960s. So maybe the Hernandez brothers knew that if they went too big within Christianity, people might get nervous. You know, claiming to be Jesus might have spooked the villagers or something. But with the Aztecs, you know, with the Aztec god or goddesses, well, I guess they could shoot for the moon. And also maybe they felt more comfortable giving a girl more power than a boy. Maybe they were worried that a boy would let the power go to his head and try and take over the cult, but not a girl. And holy shit, would they be wrong if that was the case. Let me explain now who Magdalena embodied. In art and sculptures, Coatlicue's face was depicted as 2 serpents. Pretty badass. She also wore a skirt made of snakes, so many snakes, which symbolized fertility, very rock and roll. Also wore a necklace made of hands, heart, and a skull. Super rock and roll, fuck yeah. And that represented how she fed on corpses, because the earth consumes everything that dies. So she sounds like a goddess not to fuck with. Coatlicue was also the patron of childbirth and was associated with warfare, governance, and agriculture. In some legends, she gave birth to the moon and the stars. Very big deal. Coatlicue was worshipped by the Aztecs during spring rituals and the fall harvest and hunting festival. In some Aztec rituals, a young woman would dress up as Coatlicue and be sacrificed as a tribute. The Aztecs, been a long time since we covered them, very, very into human sacrifice. According to Aztec mythology, which shares a lot of parallels actually with Greek and Roman mythology, Coatlicue was once a priestess whose job was to maintain a shrine on top of the mountain, Coatepec, meaning Snake Mountain. One day, as she was crying, I don't know why she was crying, who knows, I guess gods sometimes cry, a ball of feathers fell to her from the sky, and she tucked it into her belt, and it got her pregnant. What are the odds? Sounds like some kind of sky rascal, some kind of sky bandito came on those feathers, jerked off on those feathers before dropping them from the heavens. Well, nasty little trick. Well, the child she then gives birth to is the Aztec god of war, Huitzilopochtli. Coatlicue's other children weren't happy about baby boy. They became jealous, outraged. They headed to the mountain to kill mama, kill their little brother. Oh yeah, the sibling rivalry they felt was real and intense. They went straight to matricide. But their murderous plot failed when one of them changed his mind and decided to warn Huitzilopochtli. There we go. Who'd emerged from Coatlicue's womb as a fully grown warrior. Or in another version of the legend, he emerged from his mother's severed neck as a fully grown warrior. Hopefully the first version is correct. Pushing a baby out of your neck, that sounds like a terrible way to have a child. Especially if they're full grown. Not that it would feel good to push a full-grown warrior out of your front butt. Might sever your puss, like it severed her neck. Either way, Huitzilopochtli kills his siblings, defends his goddess mother, and then he throws his siblings' remains down the mountain after decapitating and dismembering them. And that is who Magdalena is, the mother of an incredibly fierce god of war and a very badass goddess with a bunch of fucking snakes in her own right. And this is how Magdalena is presented to the villagers. And they buy it, and they quickly fear her and think she's hot. The Hernandez brothers are able to sell this bullshit with some ritual and a cave theatrics. The villagers believe that Magdalena and Eleazar have been sent from the heavens, that Magdalena is a god in the flesh, and now that their potential uprising is squashed, they continue with their financial and sexual tributes. And before moving forward, I hope in their presentation that Eleazar was presented as a reincarnation of St. Francis of Assisi first, and then Magdalena was presented as Coatlicue. Otherwise, how much did that intro suck for him? Behold, it is Coatlicue, goddess of the moon, stars, and the sun, mother of war, the snake woman who feeds on dead human flesh. And also, it is Saint Francis, the undead monk who would like all to peacefully relinquish their material possessions and live lives of simple Christian piety. He has no interest in wealth or sex. He lives only to worship and be obedient to God, and he will he will hopefully find us, help us find the treasure, and, the orgies, they will continue, even though he will not approve. He does not care for sex nor treasure. And, you know what? Let's get him off here. Let's bring Coatlicue back out of here on the stage. Oh, hell yeah. Look how sexy she is. Way more exciting. Way more on brand. According to those mammoth Book of More Bizarre Crimes authors, Robin Odell and Paul Donnelly, Eleazar and Cayetano Hernandez will continue to accept sexual tributes from both women and men in the village. They're basically fucking them all. Also, Magdalena quickly moves in on the previous priestess, Selena Silvana, who is still steadily hooking up with Santos Hernandez, and they share her for a little while. But then quickly, Magdalena becomes jealous, and she wants Selena all for herself, wants her to stop seeing Santos, and she does. So she just steals his girlfriend. Pretty big power play. And the villagers quickly start to see her as the leader, her as more powerful than either of the Hernandez brothers, definitely as more powerful than her own brother. I mean, St. Francis, I just picture him just, fucking slowly just beating off under his cult robe in the corner of the cave during orgies. Maybe just crying a little bit. Not a great role. The teenage sex worker the Hernandez brothers recruited to keep their scam going is now taking over their scam. And she's not the only problem the Hernandez brothers are dealing with. They're also having a problem with Jesus. Jesus Rubio. But pronounce Jesus. Rubio had never fallen for the Hernandez brothers' scam, and he'd eventually gotten them to privately admit that they were full of shit. And in return, the brothers cut him in on their action. Rubio is now acting as a little plant. He's ratting on his fellow villagers. He's a source of information by monitoring discontent amongst the villagers and reporting what he's heard to the brothers. He also knows that Magdalena and her bro are just playing pretend as well. He's reporting to her now as well. The rest of the villagers don't realize what's going on, though. And then between March and May of 1963, Magdalena becomes the outright leader of the cult and also introduces a whole bunch of human sacrifice to this dangerous little game they're playing. According to psychologists who had examined Magdalena after her arrest, she developed what they called theological psychosis, and she began to experience religious delusions of grandeur. Basically, after she took on the role of Coatlicue, she revealed herself to be a method actress. She wasn't just pretending she was a goddess for the scam and then stepping back out of character when no villagers were around. She went all in. No, she was Coatlicue all the time. She truly seemed to start to believe that she really was an Aztec goddess. She became very power-hungry and staying in character. Shit got real bloody. But before things got bloody, Magdalena did try to prevent another rebellion peacefully. She started putting a lot of extra marijuana leaves in the ceremonial tea she was brewing that she would give out during ceremonies to keep everyone stoned and chilled out. But soon that wasn't working anymore. Whipple chill wasn't cutting it. The villagers, they wanted their fucking treasure, right? Enough of the ritual bullshit. Sure, the orgies are fun sometimes, except for when Pedro has to suck our dicks. But where's the money? Jesus Rubio, the snitch, told Magdalena that the villagers were tired of being used for sex, tired of giving them what little money they made, tired of feeding their god and conduits to the gods the little food they had. They wanted the gold. that had been initially promised by the Hernandez brothers. They wanted it right now. Well, that same night, Magdalena decides to deal with the villagers' frustration head on. And now things will get bloody. Magdalena had all the villagers gather in the main cave and told them that while most of them were faithful, got a problem. There are a few unbelievers amongst you. And these doubters, well, they're ruining everything. They're preventing the gods from revealing the location of the gold. Come on. Before this little gathering, Magdalena had arranged for Jesus Rubio to push two men into a candlelit circle, drawn on the floor of the cave before her. Very occulty. These two were identified as the blasphemers, the doubters, the shit-talkers. And Magdalena, the goddess, Coatlicue, now decreed in front of all, they needed to be destroyed immediately. She had these two men stoned to death by their fellow villagers, and then she collected their blood to be used in a new ritual ceremony. The blood was passed around in a chalice, and everyone was told to drink from it. No exceptions. It's now very much a vibe of, you are with us or against us in this cult. The villagers were told that these two murders should show the gods their devotion, and then soon, the gold would be theirs. And now life in the cult has taken a decidedly Aztec twist. In Aztec rituals involving human sacrifice, the victim was typically placed upon a stone table, and a high priest would cut open their abdomen, tear out their heart, raise it to the sky as an offering to the god of war and the sun. Right? The old Huitzilopochtli, Magdalena's son. Spanish conquistador Hernan Cortez and his men wrote about these ceremonies when they arrived in Mexico. They wrote that the victim's still beating heart would be offered to the gods and that the victim's body would be thrown down the steps of the Aztecs' Templo Mayor, located in present-day Mexico City. They also described witnessing two towers made of human skulls, and between these towers was a wooden rack with thousands of additional skulls placed upon it. Historians dismissed these claims as outlandish exaggerations for centuries, but in 2015 and 2018, archaeologists working on an excavation site at the Templo Mayor site found that the skull towers and skull racks were very real. Anthropology professor Jean Verano has written about how human sacrifice held deep significance to the Aztecs and coincided with important calendar dates. Sacrifice was also used to dedicate temples, to reverse drought and famine, maybe for funsies. The Aztecs believed the universe was unstable, and they were constantly under the threat of death and destruction. And the best way to keep most of the people safe and alive was to kill a few. They also believed it was necessary to make sacrifices to the gods for, growing crops, a variety of other things. The Aztecs believed that Huitzilopochtli was constantly fighting the darkness and the world would end if he lost the war. And in order to keep the sun moving across the sky, they had to feed this god human hearts and blood. Aztecs also practiced ritual cannibalism. Illustrations from the 16th century show human body parts being cooked in large pots. Archaeologists have also identified butcher marks on the bones of human remains in Aztec sites in Mexico City. Magdalena, or someone else in charge, must have had some knowledge about the ways of the Aztecs because as she kills more going forward, the way victims are killed begins to mirror Aztec sacrificial traditions more and more closely. The first murder in the cave seems to have ignited Magdalena's bloodlust. And now she begins to demand more human sacrifices and creates an elaborate blood ritual. The chosen victims are, not surprisingly, almost always individuals who've been talking shit, people who have been identified as doubters, as potential defectors or people who might try and go to the authorities or lead a rebellion. Over and over, we don't know exactly how often this happened, the cult members would gather in their mountain cave lair and Magdalena would direct everyone who didn't just find out they were being sacrificed to participate in beating, burning, and cutting the sacrificial victim. And then after they'd been badly beaten but were still apparently alive, she would finish them off by cutting out their heart with a sacrificial dagger. Full Aztec. The victim's blood would be collected in a ceremonial chalice where it would be mixed with chicken blood and drugs like marijuana or peyote, a hallucinogenic cactus that I really want to try someday. Give me that mescaline! Magdalena would drink from it before passing it on to the Hernandez brothers and then her brother and former pimp, Eleazar, the now lowly St. Francis, who was not behaving very St. Francis-like at all. And then the chalice will be passed on to the remaining followers. The villagers were told that the blood was the only food that the gods could ingest, and as a goddess, Magdalena needed to drink it to preserve her eternal youth. And after this, from what it sounds like, an orgy would break out. Sex, drugs, and murder instead of rock and roll. Blood rituals like this one, some that may have involved a more traditional form of cannibalism as well, in which actual flesh was consumed instead of just blood being drank, Rituals where sometimes victims were decapitated and completely dismembered as well. Well, they continue for the next 6 weeks. And at least 6 more people are sacrificed, but possibly a dozen or more died this way. All in order to please the gods, to please Magdalena, so that they could have the location of the treasure be revealed. A few of the villagers, fearing that they would be the next ones chosen for the blood ritual, well, unsurprisingly, they now fled La Yerba Buena. Yeah, I bet they did. I mean, can you imagine continuing to head up to this cave up on the mountain, not knowing every time if it's going to be your time to end up getting killed? Not knowing if you're going to end up participating in a murder and getting high, drinking blood, and fucking your neighbor's brains out, or being beaten to death and slashed to death by your neighbors and then having Magdalena cut out your fucking heart. Jesus Rubio, the man who knew the full truth about what was going on behind the scenes, well, he eventually tells Magdalena, Eleazar, and the Hernandez brothers, in the midst of all these sacrifices, that shit has gone too far. Right? The villagers, they've been pushed way too far, and the scam needs to come to an end because the deserters have most likely already gone to the police. But Magdalena, not ready to give up being a goddess. She wants to stay. She wants to keep this dark cosplay of hers going. She thought all of the dissent and fear could be fixed with another sacrifice, a dramatic one that would even protect them from the police, from the army. She decided they needed to sacrifice the priestess, her girlfriend, Selena Salvana. And supposedly Selena agreed to be sacrificed. Magdalena seemed to think she really was a goddess, and so did Selena. Selena felt she would be rewarded for this sacrifice. Her soul would be sent to one of the highest levels of the highly stratified Aztec afterlife, and the villagers will be rewarded with so much gold. And on May 28, 1963, Selena was tied to a cross inside the cave, this teenage girl, which caused her to eventually lose consciousness with her arms held above her head. She couldn't breathe very well, which was a small mercy, a small kindness, because she was then beaten and slashed to death by the villagers, some of whom used machetes to hack away at her. Her heart was then cut out, her blood drained into the chalice, and her body burned. And unbeknownst to anyone present, someone who was not a part of this cult witnessed all of this. 14-year-old Sebastian Guerrero, a kid from another local village at the base of the mountains, was out exploring some caves near La Yerba Buena, possibly looking for the fabled hidden treasure, possibly trying to see if an orgy was, going down so he could fucking hide out in the shadows and beat off in the bushes, if not join in, if he didn't get an invite. Or maybe he was just curious what was in the caves, when he stumbled upon the gruesome scene. He saw a beaten, bloody, and mutilated woman tied to a cross. Another woman in robes lighting her dead body on fire. Then he witnessed another murder. As the woman burned, he watched a villager step forward and shout something about not getting their gold. And then he saw the woman in robes call this man an unbeliever and order that he be killed. And then Sebastian watched as other villagers grabbed the man, threw him to the ground, and hacked at him with machetes before the woman in robes cut his heart out as well. Can you imagine stumbling upon a scene like that when you're fucking 14? I mean, it would be beyond shocking at any age, but extra terrifying as a kid. Well, Sebastian had seen enough. He'd seen way more than enough. Terrified, he now runs to the closest police station. He runs 15 and a half miles away to the town of Villagran. By the time he arrives, Sebastian is exhausted and in shock. Of course he is. He tells the officers about everything he saw, and they laughed at him. They didn't believe him. It sounded utterly ridiculous. But because he was so insistent, they agreed to send an officer, one officer, Officer Luis Martinez, to the cave the following morning to go check out these supposed vampires, they were calling them. And Sebastian would need to lead the way and show him exactly where the cave was. And Sebastian agrees. Well, the teen and the officer, they set out the next morning. And then they are never seen alive again by anyone who knew them. Sebastian and Officer Martinez are reported missing. And now the other officers begin to think, well, maybe poor Sebastian was telling the truth. Or at least a version of it. At least he witnessed something awful. Worried that they were now dealing with a very dangerous situation, the local police contact the army and police from the state capital to investigate the disappearances. And a raid on the village will now be led by Inspector Abelardo Gomez. On May 31st, 1963, a large group of police and soldiers raid La Yerba Buena. Magdalena and Eleazar Solís are found. They're arrested inside a shack in a nearby farm. Supposedly there was bloody body parts spread out around the shack. They're both high as shit on weed at the time. Santos Hernandez is killed in the cave compound in a police shootout. Cayetano Hernandez, killed by former cult member, former snitch, Jesus Rubio, the informant. But that felt good for Jesus. Both Hernandez brothers are now dead about 6 months after founding this cult. Other cult members, they flee into the mountains. They barricade themselves inside of various caves, firing at soldiers and officers. Many of them will die when the authorities fire back. And then once everyone in the cult is either dead or has been arrested, an assessment of the carnage is made. The bodies of that poor 14-year-old Sebastian Guerrero and the officer who came with him, Luis Martinez, well, they're found on the farm where Magdalena and Eleazar were arrested. Martinez had almost been completely decapitated with a machete. His heart had been removed, which indicated, of course, he had been another victim of Magdalena's blood rituals. Sources are not as clear about Guerrero, but I'm assuming he met the same fate or very similar one. I bet for a few days Magdalena was like, see, I told you, no one can harm us. Even the police will meet their doom if they fuck with the goddess. But then a whole bunch of police showed up and she was like, oh, shit. Okay, gig's up. June 4th, 1963, the Mexican police report that Magdalena, her brother, and 40 other cult members have been brought in for questioning. Magdalena is described in the papers as an attractive teenage priestess. It's reported that up to a dozen people may have been sacrificed because the farmers of La Yerba Buena cannot account for a dozen missing people. Officer Abelardo Gomez would claim that one victim was a woman who had been burned at the stake after she was clubbed to death by villagers that included her 14-year-old son. She had been accused of being a witch. A man named Antonio Saceda was amongst the group who was arrested, and he said he was a slave and earthly worker for Magdalena and her brother, and he expected future glory for serving them. During her interrogation, Magdalena told the police that being involved in the world of prophets, priestesses, and rituals was nothing new to her. She said she'd been conducting rites for 6 years after she joined the so-called Confederation of Spiritualists in Mexico City. She said that she and her brother operated in the border communities and charged her American clients $10 per seance. And it seems as if she was lying here, trying to act like, well, if the police took it easy on her, oh, she could give them names. She could lead them to the real leaders of a much bigger cult that extended around the country. The police wouldn't bite on this. Just a week later, on June 12, 1963, Magdalena, her brother Eleazar, and a dozen other cult members go to trial for the murders. Magdalena and her brother Eleazar would be both sentenced to 50 years in prison for the murders of Sebastian Guerrero and Officer Luis Martinez. Seems a little unfair for St. Francis. I mean, how involved was he? He's just hanging out in the cave. You know, he's just beating off in the shadows during the orgies. You know, focusing on trying to be, poor and humble and shit. He wasn't a bloodthirsty goddess. He was a simple monk. The siblings would not be convicted of the other murders due to a lack of evidence. The remaining cult members charged with murders would be given 30-year sentences for their involvements. Jesus Rubio would testify that the cult was led by Magdalena and Eleazar Solís. In court, Magdalena and her girlfriend Selena, in court, Magdalena, oh my God, said her girlfriend, Selena, there we go, was chosen for sacrifice because she was an unusually good follower of the cult. Man, what a reward for her loyalty. Oh, you get to be fucking crucified and chopped up with machetes for being such a good cult member. She said her sacrifice was supposed to reveal where the treasure was buried. Magdalena was still in character. She seemed genuinely surprised that the treasure had not been revealed. After these reports, we lose track of Magdalena Solís and her brother. If she served her full 50 years and didn't die in prison, her release date would have been 2013. However, her current whereabouts or whether or not she is alive is unknown. At least one source said that she reportedly died in prison, though. But they didn't say when or how or where they got that info. Now, before I finish this tale, a little more info about some other terrible shit this cult seems to have gotten up to that we didn't just learn. We learned about this about 6 years ago. In 2018, a writer, researcher, and professor named Dr. Tony Zavaleta published a blog post about his encounter with a member of the La Yerba Buena cult. Dr. Zavaleta claimed that back in 1963, when he was just 16, he met a teenage girl from La Yerba Buena just weeks before the downfall of the cult. He said he was attending St. Joseph Academy in Brownsville, Texas at the time, which is right on the border. Some of the students at his school came from wealthy Mexican families in Matamoros, a city directly across the border in Tamaulipas. And Zavaleta and his friends sometimes crossed the border to visit the Matamoros red light district, which was on the outskirts of the city. And he said that one day he went to a bar 2 or 3 blocks away from the area that he usually frequented, and he met and befriended a girl named Lupita. And by befriended, he means paid her to have sex with him. He continued coming to the red light district to see her during the spring of 1963, and eventually learned she was from La Yerba Buena, but had been forced to move to Matamoros to do sex work to protect her family, who were being held captive by a religious cult that had taken over the village. And at this point, he begged her to stop talking because what she was saying was really sad, and it was making it super hard for him to come. He said that if she kept telling the story, he would have to insist on her handing him his dollar back. JK, no, thank God he doesn't seem like he was that fucking heartless. Now, he said she told him that herself, some other girls from the village had all moved to the border towns, been forced into sex work, which helped the cult earn money. Lupita told him that the village was a communal farm with about 20 families who had moved there from the central state of Guanajuato to develop farms in Tamaulipas. And in La Yerba Buena, the villagers had been left unprotected. The village had no formal government, no law enforcement, no church, no school in 1962 and 1963. Despite this, I mean, I know that kid, ran 15.5 miles to find authorities, but they were not monitoring this area. Despite this, she said that their lives were fine until the Hernandez brothers arrived. She was just 14 herself when they showed up, and she was singled out because she was deemed pretty. The brothers convinced her parents that it was the will of the gods for her to go sell her ass. In his blog post, Dr. Zavaleta claims that the papers never covered the fact that the girls were sent to other cities for sex work, and he wasn't sure why. He also wrote that he never saw Lupita again, which is a bummer. Oh, even though those two were just 16 and 14, I was kind of hoping for some kind of pretty woman style ending to their story. Many years later, in the 1980s, still thinking about what the girl had told him when he was just a high school kid, Dr. Zavaleta said he traveled to La Yerba Buena, but no one there was willing to talk to him about what had happened with the cult so many years earlier. And that is all we know about Magdalena Solís, the high priestess of blood. Many details of her story have been lost to time, or perhaps were just never translated from Spanish into English sources, or those sources were never digitized. Very hard to find detailed information about this story, but it still fascinates people around the world. And of course it does. In 1963, a small cult based in Aztec sacrificial rituals gathered in a fucking cave in the mountains above a small Mexican village where around a dozen people were sacrificed, where their hearts were cut out, where their blood was drank, where bloody drug-fueled orgies were held around their dead bodies. I told you the story was right for October. I mean, doesn't it truly sound like something straight out of a horror movie? Except it was real. And that's it for this edition of Time Sucks, Short Sucks. If you enjoyed the story, check out the rest of the Bad Magic catalog. Beefier episodes, I can talk sometimes, of Time Suck every Monday at noon Pacific time. New episodes of the now long-running, told you I could talk sometimes, and now long-running, come on words, let's go, paranormal podcast, Scared to Death, every Tuesday at midnight, with 2 episodes of Nightmare Fuel, fictional horror thrown into the mix each month. Big thank you to Olivia Lee for doing the initial research on this one. Been wanting to talk about her for a while. And thank you to Logan Keith, polishing up the sound of today's episode and making the cool episode thumbnail art. Please go to badmagicproductions.com for all your bad magic needs. And have yourself a great weekend.
Bad Magic Productions.